You would think that the studios would have figured this out, but it seems like it's taken all these years for One Piece to come along. I mean, Peter Jackson had it ages ago, and what? Hardly anything since then. At least in my favorite genres. Hey, this is the Sword and the Pen Reflections. It is my casual alternative to the formal channel, The Sword and the Pen, link up there. If you're new, here's the deal. I'm a freelance book editor, and I've been taking books and their adaptations and comparing the two to see which one I think is doing a better job at telling a great story. But I'm breaking my pattern, and I'm going to be looking at Avatar the Last Airbender and discussing what I think needs to be done for its live-action adaptation, which will be coming out in a couple weeks on Netflix. But before I dive deep into Avatar, I wanted to take a pause and just discuss faithful adaptations. So in this video, I'm going to address why I think studios should want to do a faithful adaptation and want to avoid doing an unfaithful adaptation. I'll attempt to articulate what I think is a faithful adaptation that fans of the original actually want, and I'll go over my personal opinion of what the rules and areas of consideration for developing a faithful adaptation ought to be. I'll also end this by discussing who I think should be consulted when developing a faithful adaptation. And my answer might be considered a bit of a hot take, so stick around if you want to find out what that is. So first, why should studios want to do a faithful adaptation? Well, first and most obviously, it's a tried and tested product with success in its own target market. Stories are often perfect combinations of specially tailored world building, characters, plot, themes, and tone. And it's so much easier to use what has already been proven to work than to change something, even just one thing, and have to tailor it to fit seamlessly into a story that was already complete without it. Or worse, to change that one thing and then have to go in and retailor all the other parts to make the thing work with them. I mean, why give yourself that extra workload? Another reason is because it's got a guaranteed pre-existing audience that will watch to completion. If there's a wide fan base of the original material and they hear about another adaptation, they're going to check it out, and they're going to probably watch it all the way to the end, especially if it's a series, they'll watch it to the end of the first season, just to see if it's being faithful. And if it's faithful, they'll probably want to keep watching it, because remember, they loved it before in the other medium. The last reason I think that you should want to do a faithful adaptation is that you'll basically be creating a free army of promoters and advertisers. I mean, let's say that you've got a fan base of 50,000 people, and 10% of them are active on social media and like to talk about the things that they enjoy with their friends and family. Well, that's going to be 5,000 people who are going to go out and tell people to check out this adaptation of something that they really love that was done faithfully. Why wouldn't you want that? I found out about the One Piece live-action adaptation. I mean, I heard about it, on Netflix, you see the advertisements, but I really didn't have a whole lot of interest in it until somebody whose judgment I trusted said it's a faithful adaptation of the original IP. Next, why should studios not want to do an unfaithful adaptation? Well, like I said before, stories are often perfect combinations of specially tailored world building, characters, plot, themes, and tone. And changing too much of even one part can spoil the whole to the point that it becomes unwatchable, or it just gives it that little sour cheesiness or whatever that makes you all kind of go, yeah, it was great except that one thing. And this isn't because something was added, it's because maybe something was added carelessly and it didn't fit in with everything else. So I heard that in the Lord of the Rings, the Peter Jackson movies, Peter Jackson at one point wanted to have Aragorn have a sword fight with Sauron, like an embodied version of Sauron at that last battle at the gates of, I forget what the heck the names of the gates were, but where they talk to the mouth of Sauron and stuff. And that would have taken away from the impact of where the real battle was happening, which was in Mount Doom with Frodo and the Ring and with Gollum and Sam. And I'm not talking about a physical battle so much as a psychological, spiritual battle that was happening there. If you had Aragorn fighting Sauron, then it becomes this two-part battle. And the whole purpose of Aragorn's attack at the gate there was to be a distraction so that Frodo could sneak into Mount Doom and get all the way up to the lava, essentially, without Sauron noticing. So you see what I mean? It would have been like, it took away the impact of that ending. It said, now we have two battles going on. But really, What the point of this story was is that the battle happening in Frodo's heart was so important that they're gonna send an entire army, possibly to their doom, just to be a distraction so that the real war can be won over there. Now let's assume that it's like a majorly altered story. Well, there's no guarantee that that majorly altered story is gonna appeal to a large audience. It hasn't been tested before. It's a bigger risk, and I kind of get the impression that studios are a bit more careful about taking risks with the types of material that they're willing to produce. Sometimes it may not seem evident, but I'm sure that's what's going on. They must be thinking it now, at least. And lastly, why studios should not want to do an unfaithful adaptation, and yes, it mirrors what I said before, is that if it's unfaithful and it's not done well, you're probably gonna get a passionate army of trolls that will angrily spread their dissatisfaction of the adaptation. They're gonna expose every single flaw and turn away potential other audiences. All right, so what, in my opinion, is a faithful adaptation? I believe that it's the translation of an intellectual property from one medium to another, where the only changes made are those that are necessary to make the IP more palatable in the new medium, and whatever constraints come with that new medium. But where the world, the themes, the tones, characters, and major plot points adhere to those in the original. I know that's kind of a dry definition, but we're gonna get into it with this next question, which is, what do I think fans who want a faithful adaptation actually want? I believe that what we want is to experience the same world, characters, themes, major plot points, and tones through a different medium. We know that sometimes things have to be cut and combined or added, especially with new limitations like time constraints. But what we don't want is for the changes to be made because the producers want to do something different that does not serve or honor the original material. I think that's the big key word there too, is honor.
Wait! What's that? I think it's your honor!
Where?
If it's really obvious that something was added because they wanted to add it, but it wasn't doing those two things, serving and honoring the original material, it's gonna feel like it's dishonoring the original material. It's gonna feel like you were using somebody else's work as a vehicle to get your stuff out there to a bigger audience. And that's not cool. People who do this sort of thing, I think they don't love the original material and want to share this thing that they love with the world. It's more like, this is something a lot of other people love. I'm going to stick my name into that little thing somehow, and then everybody will associate the success of this thing with me. But anyway, let's move on. Okay, what are my personal rules for a faithful adaptation? Number 1, condense, cut, and combine for the sake of time. 2, add things only to smooth over the changes that have to be made or to serve and honor the original material without detracting from what is important to what already exists. That's the key bit there, what's important to what already exists. Number 3, change things in order to make them more effective in the new medium at conveying the essence of what is already present in the source material. And before any changes are implemented, verify that they will not contradict or undermine anything that has come before it, and then follow the butterfly effect of everything that this change will affect all the way to the end of the story to ensure the same. And when adapting a series, all prior and subsequent books and episodes and things, and chapters, whatever, you get the idea, they need to be considered in this. Also, avoid making any major changes to the world, characters, plot points, tone, and themes unless an estimated 70%ish of the pre-existing fanbase agree that such a change would be a vast improvement to the original material. A really good example of that would be actually Shadow and Bone. So a lot of people complained that the love interest, Mal, was kind of a jerk to our heroine in the books. And so when the show came out, they made him a lot more likable. They took the jerk out of him and they said, okay, we're going to have him be very caring and protective and a good friend. So that was a good thing. I actually don't know anybody, maybe there are some of you out there, but I don't know of anybody who thought that the change to Mal, especially in season 1 from the books, was a bad thing. I think we all thought that was a good change. And I pulled 70% out of nowhere. I just thought it should be more than like 2/3 of the fan base. That sounds reasonable to me. Please like, subscribe, and comment, even if it's just with an emoji. It's a free way to support the channel. Or if you're feeling really generous, check out my Patreon, Ko-fi, or hit the money heart thanks button. You can even leave me a one-time tip. Information is in the description and below. What are the areas of an IP I believe should be considered for developing a faithful adaptation? Well, you've heard me say it in this video already a few times. World building, characters, major plot points, tone, and themes. World building would encompass geography, which will include like the natural laws of the world, culture, which would be like the social, economic, religious, governmental layout and structure of the world, the history of the people in this world, or if there's major natural events that happened, like in The Wheel of Time, the whole world basically getting pretty much destroyed and then having to come back again. And lastly, the magic system, if it's a fantasy. If it's a science fiction, I would say the technological abilities and capabilities, and those are two separate things. The things that they're actually doing and the things that they actually could do. With characters, I think we have to break it up into 3 tiers. So first off, all essential characteristics of each of the main and secondary characters need to get in there. A main character would be like Harry, Ron, and Hermione. A secondary character would be like Dumbledore, Snape, and Mr. Weasley. There is a 3rd tier, and that would be tertiary characters. Characters who have lines and have involvement in the plot, but they're way on the edge there. This would be like Lavender Brown and Colin Creevey. And I would even put Cho Chang in there because she's really only important for like 1 book. Don't come after me for making this comment. You really could have gotten rid of her for all the other books, and we probably wouldn't have noticed that she was gone. You would also want that the general start and end points of these main and secondary characters are pretty much the same. And this next one kind of ties into this, and that is that all the significant and essential change points in the main and secondary characters' arcs need to be passed through. One of the things that I can't wait to talk about in my Avatar the Last Airbender videos is going to be the arc of Zuko. I think everybody loves talking about it because it's so well done, but there are certain things that had to happen to him in a certain order in order for him to have his redemption. And if you don't go through those things, it's gonna feel unearned by the time you get to that moment, the one that we all remember, when the lights turned on and he knew what he was really supposed to be doing. All main and secondary characters who are essential to the main plot or development of the major characters are included, or their roles are fulfilled in some other way, like character combining tertiary characters. Next area for consideration are the plot points. I think that all significant and essential events that change the trajectory of the main plot and the main characters need to be included or fulfilled in some way, such as truncation of locations and events. The next area I think should be seriously considered when making an adaptation are the themes. All major themes essential to the unique themes of the whole need to be upheld and honored. I am going to do videos for Avatar the Last Airbender on each of these 5 categories, and this is one that I'm going to focus a lot on. It's so important that the themes come across, the ones that, this is the soul of a story typically. Think of the theme, yes, as the soul. And the last area that I think needs to be considered for adaptations are the tones. The essence of the tones, in some cases by the scene, character, world, or theme, they need to be generally adhered to within the scope and context of the IP's new medium and how such tones are expressed. Again, we'll get more into this in my other videos, but we gotta move on. Who, in my opinion, should be consulted for developing a faithful adaptation? And my answer is definitely a hot take. So, most obviously, the original creators. But I think that this is not always the best option.
Blasphemy. You're lucky I don't cast you out or smite you or something.
It should seem like the original creators are going to be the absolute best possible option for guiding the development of an adaptation that is faithful. But sometimes it's not, and here are some of the cases where I think you should consider not consulting the original creator, or maybe just not having them so involved. Because I think that these sort of things happen to creators a lot. They, one, have a loss of passion for the IP. Imagine that you wrote Twilight. okay? And Twilight was the thing that people talked to you about every day, and you were always thinking about the stories and trying to develop them for 10 years. And then somebody comes along and wants to make a movie about it, and you've already in your head like gone, oh my gosh, I'm just so burned out by this. But they're saying, can you do this with us for another 7 years? That would not be very appealing to somebody who's feeling burned out about it. They maybe aren't as enthusiastic about making sure that everything is done to honor the heart of the original material. I'm not saying that's what happened with Twilight, I'm just giving an example of Twilight. I never read them, but I have seen the movies.
This is the skin of a killer, Bill.
So in this case, I think you would just want to gauge the enthusiasm of your creator or of the original creator. Like, do they still seem really enthusiastic about this material, about this particular story? Or do they feel like they've just lost that passion for it? If they have lost it, you might want to keep them at a slight distance because they might just be like, whatever, do whatever you want, when they should have been saying, actually, that will screw something up later on if you do this. Another type of original creator you might want to avoid getting too heavily involved is one that lacks the understanding of how to tell a story in the new medium. Now, when the Avatar the Last Airbender creators bounced early on in the development, at first I saw it as a big red flag. I said, oh no, don't do like now. This is not going to be a good thing. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized we've only really seen them working in animation. And animation is very different from live action. The pacing is different. The way things are expressed is different. It's a whole new medium. It would be like taking somebody who's worked in pastels their whole life and saying, we now want you to make a clay sculpture. It's a different animal altogether. Now, some can totally do it. Some really do understand this. There has to be some flexibility there. And it made me wonder if perhaps the original creators didn't really know how to work in this new medium. And if that's the case, then maybe it was a good thing that they separated themselves from it. I mean, I know that they're doing other animated stuff now too, so maybe that's where they wanted to be, and this was something that frustrated them and they didn't want to work with it. Let them be creators in a medium that they're comfortable in. Another type of original creator you might want to avoid is one that lacks an interest in remaining faithful to the original story. So I think that we've seen it before, where somebody has created this really great story, right? But afterwards, they kind of change the way that they're telling stories, and now they want to change this one. Well, okay, depending on what those changes are, if they're major, you got to take into consideration that people didn't fall in love with what this creator had in their head and wished they could have done differently. They fell in love with what they actually did. So before getting this sort of creator involved, the one who wants to take their original material that everybody loved and really change it a lot, before you get that person involved, consider how much of the change is there and maybe how many people would have agreed with that change. And the last type of original creator you might want to avoid is one that lacks the ability to tell any story other than the one that they have already told. And I know that this seems like, well, you know, if they've got one good story, they should be able to know how to tell it in a different way. Well, no, I think we've clarified in this video that yes, some changes are going to have to be made. And some creators can do like a really amazing thing once, and then, you know, you read all their other stuff and you go, this was not as good. It really lacked something. Like they had one awesome idea and it just worked. Well, you need somebody who has the skill and the ability to be flexible when you're adapting to a new medium. And being unable to tell any story other than the one that they've already told might be a sign that they don't understand how to tell any other kind of story or even tell their story in a new medium. So again, this is not saying they shouldn't be involved so much as just considering that this might not be the person that you want working on your adaptation. So who are some other people that you might want to have involved in guiding the development of a faithful adaptation? I think that would be experts in the IP and all relevant material, including fans with an expertise in storytelling and, you know, who have a wide following of fans who agree with his or her views of the IP. So I'm just going to give an example of somebody who is a big fan of Avatar the Last Airbender and also an expert in storytelling. Hello Future Me. If you haven't seen his channel, go check it out. I have a huge amount of respect for this writer and a content creator. He has some of the best lectures on storytelling that I found on all of YouTube. And one of his main focuses is Avatar the Last Airbender. He knows this IP inside and out. He's read all of the comics and he has watched all of the animated series. He reads all the behind the scenes stuff. Like, he really knows it well. And he's gotten experts in like psychology to help him develop video essays dissecting the psychology of Azula. It's one of his best videos. You really should check it out. This would be somebody, and he has a huge fan base who all agree with the points that he's making, or with the observations that he is making. They all say, you've just said what I couldn't understand why I felt this way about it, but you just picked it apart and said this is why, and it made sense. So this would be a person who obviously has an opinion that a lot of people agree with. I think this would be a good person to go to for kind of a feeler, at least, like, what do you think if we do this change, will that work? And he might have some really good advice for how to do it and be effective in the new medium, because he understands storytelling and he's a great lover of the original material. Another resource for developing a faithful adaptation is one that I think is probably the most commonly found in Hollywood today. And these are storytelling experts, but this is what I would hope for. We would want a storytelling expert who can acquire an expert level knowledge of the source material, or who are willing to work really closely with experts of the source material already. And you want them to have a love for the material. You certainly don't want one that despises it. So let's say that you've got a great writer who says they want to be involved in this adaptation, and they go and do their research and they meet up with other experts of the IP, but then they just don't like it. They just don't love it. That's not somebody I'm talking about. That's not the kind of that's the one that you say, okay, I know that we were really excited to have you on the project, but you really don't seem to love it, so I think we're just gonna have to go with somebody else. And it'll be obvious if it's somebody who loves the source material, because they'll just be excited about it. They'll be wanting to talk about how great certain things are in the original story. I'm thinking about The Witcher when I think of the nightmare scenario here. And I don't know a whole lot about The Witcher, but I did read all the headlines, and I watched season 1 of the show, have not read the books. But we all heard the same thing, that the writers hated the original material and the lead character. Like, they just despised it. I mean, could you imagine what kind of material is going to be produced by people who hate the source material? It's not going to be good, and it's going to be obvious. There'll be a lack of care in consistency especially, but in also creating likability. That they won't understand why people liked these characters, so why are you going to trust them to create the characters that people liked? Or even to create changes that are consistent with the reasons why we liked these original characters. Moving on. And finally, I wish that this would be done. I don't know why. Well, I'm sure that it's done to some degree with test audiences and things, but I don't know why this isn't a more common thing, where you have sort of a committee of fans of the original material who also clearly have a good understanding of storytelling, maybe a fan base that agrees with them, like Hello Future Me kind of person. Why wouldn't you want to have like a test audience of like maybe 10 or 15 of these kind of people, and you can run ideas past them and just kind of get a consensus on what they all think and feel before you make major changes in your adaptation. I don't think, like, if you can have people on a set whose only job is to move sandbags or to, wrap audio cables, if you can keep those people's mouths shut about things that are going to be happening behind the scenes, I'm sure you can keep the mouths shut of people who are involved in things behind the scenes like this. So I just don't understand why it's not done. I guarantee that there are many who would do this for free, or they would do it for credit. And I know that there's different things going on with unions about how they do this, but what is it for a test audience? Because a test audience, I think, could work for like a rough draft in script writing. If you came up with a rough draft of a script and sent it to these people, they could count as a test audience, a volunteer test audience. But anyway, that pretty much covers all I need to discuss about a faithful adaptation, why I think studios should want one, what the fans actually want, what I think is needed to create a faithful adaptation. My next few videos are going to be focused specifically on Avatar the Last Airbender, and I'm going to discuss each of those 5 categories that I went over. And when I get to characters, I'm gonna do one video for each of the main characters of Avatar the Last Airbender. This show, this story is so good. It really deserves a good, faithful adaptation, and I'm hoping that's what we're going to get. So my goal is to point out the things that I think need to be done in order for our adaptation to be considered faithful. And then after that, it's just a question of quality. But the teaser looked pretty good, so we'll see. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. If you're feeling super generous, check out my Patreon, Ko-fi, or the Money Heart Thanks button down below. I've also got it in the description, and be good to yourself.